Building a castle was not like putting together a simple wooden shelf. There were no pre-drilled holes, and one mistake meant not a rickety structure, but a few tons of rock falling on your skull, a lesson kings often learned the hard way. Medieval kings were real estate experts, and they looked to more than just good-schooled districts to build their fortresses. Picking the right location was a deadly game of Monopoly. Getting it wrong could cost you more than just money. A king couldn't just point to a map and say, "Put my castle here." They needed a place that was safe, well-stocked, and powerful a choice, like choosing the perfect spot in a classroom, where you can see everything, get to the door, and grab a pencil. Only instead of pencils, you are talking about protection from armies trying to conquer you. High ground was the medieval equivalent of penthouse living. From an elevated position, you could spot enemies coming from miles away, providing ample time to prepare your defenses. Furthermore, attacking uphill is exhausting. Imagine trying to run up a steep hill while carrying heavy weapons and armor. It is a daunting task, even without people shooting arrows at you. Water sources were also crucial, and not just for staying hydrated. Rivers and lakes acted as natural moats, making it much harder for enemies to approach and attack. They also provided a vital supply of fresh water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning, because no one wants to live in a castle that smells like unwashed socks. Recent archaeological studies have even revealed ingenious water management systems, including underground cisterns, capable of storing enough water to support hundreds of people for months during a siege. Being close to major roads and trade routes was like having your castle situated next to a medieval highway. You needed a constant influx of supplies, food, weapons, building materials, and all the other necessities that keep a castle operational. This is similar to how modern cities grow around major transportation hubs, except instead of Amazon deliveries, you were receiving cartloads of grain and iron. Of course, sometimes the perfect spot for a castle was already occupied. Imagine having to tell a whole village that the king wanted their hill for his new project, and it was time for them to pack up and move. Historical records show that some medieval kings would relocate entire communities, sometimes of up to 1,000 people, just to build their castles. In an extreme version of eminent domain, they would sometimes even move entire churches, a delicate matter one would have to explain carefully to the Pope. The process of securing the perfect location was not merely a physical endeavor. Kings had to navigate a complex web of politics, property rights, and feudal obligations. A game that felt like playing chess, Risk, and SimCity all at once. One wrong move could trigger a war or a peasant revolt. And there are documented cases of castle construction projects being abandoned halfway through due to such political disputes. To mitigate these issues, kings would sometimes try to sweeten the deal for displaced locals, offering them alternative land, tax breaks, or other perks. It was like when your parents buy you ice cream after making you clean your room, except the room was your entire village. One particularly clever king in the 12th century even offered lifetime positions on his castle staff to the leaders of a displaced village, a truly medieval career change. The really smart kings would choose spots that held symbolic meaning as well. Building a castle on the site of an ancient battlefield or a holy ground was a form of medieval public relations, sending a powerful message about authority and legitimacy, much like how modern politicians deliver speeches at historic locations, but with more dungeons and drawbridges. Orzages anamyunsal, ye robol. Some castles were even built on sites with local legends or myths attached, adding a layer of supernatural intimidation to their already imposing presence. Defensive considerations could also get quite creative. Some kings chose locations that seemed terrible at first, like a swamp, which despite the smell, made moving heavy siege equipment through the marshland nearly impossible. One famous castle in Wales was built with 3 sides facing steep cliffs, a clever design that made it practically unassailable from those directions. Once the perfect spot was chosen, the truly difficult part began, gathering all the materials needed to build a massive stone fortress. This was a logistical nightmare that would make modern construction projects look like building with Legos. Just imagine trying to move thousands of tons of stone without trucks, cranes, or even proper roads. A typical medium-sized castle required about 12,000 tons of stone, which is the equivalent weight of about 2,000 elephants, while the largest castles could use up to 50,000 tons. Savakop Fort is the Einvetuvd. Joijista Ivatitsa. Some of the larger castles in Wales used stone blocks weighing up to 1.5 tons each, heavier than a modern car, and you thought moving your couch was hard. The closest quarry was not always conveniently located next door. Often the best stone was miles away, which meant organizing the medieval equivalent of a cross-country moving company. They would even create temporary wooden roads, just to handle the weight of the stone blocks, laying down thick planks and regularly replacing them as they wore out. Transportation was a circus act in itself, with oxen serving as the medieval version of semi-trucks, albeit much slower and with more attitude problems. A team of oxen could pull about 2 tons of stone at a blazing speed of 2 miles per hour, meaning a 10-mile trip from the quarry would take an entire day. Some clever builders utilized rivers when possible, floating stone downstream on barges in what was the medieval equivalent of prime shipping. Stone was not the one and only material they needed. Wood was just as important, and they required tons of it for scaffolding, roofs, doors, and temporary structures. Records from one castle build show they used over 3,000 trees just for the scaffolding, leading to such severe deforestation in some areas that the woodland has not fully recovered 800 years later. The situation grew so dire that kings declared entire forests off-limits to everyone except their castle builders, with harsh punishments for breaking these laws. Then there was the need for skilled labor. Master stonemasons were the rock stars of the medieval construction world, and kings would compete for the best builders, offering them special privileges and fat paychecks. One famous mason reportedly insisted on being paid partly in wine from specific vineyards. The workforce was massive, with some castle builds employing over 1,000 workers at their peak. You had specialized stone cutters, carpenters, blacksmiths, and general laborers, each with their own guild rules and pay scales. Managing them all was like herding cats in medieval work boots. Among these workers were the unsung heroes, the rope makers. A major castle build could use several miles of rope for hauling stones and operating pulleys, rope that had to be incredibly strong and regularly replaced. Perhaps the most surprising material needed was iron. Tons of it for tools, nails, and hinges, at a time when it was worth its weight in silver. Records from one castle show they used over 50,000 nails for the scaffolding alone. Quality control was another major headache. Stone blocks had to be cut to exact specifications, and workers developed sophisticated, if unhygienic, techniques like licking the stones to check for impurities. They also had to inspect wood for rot and iron for flaws, as one wrong material could bring down an entire wall. Finally, there was the challenge of storage. Builders constructed temporary shelters to protect their materials from the elements, creating a sort of medieval Home Depot on site. With all the materials gathered, it was time for the next phase, laying the foundation. Because when you are about to stack thousands of tons of stone, you had better make sure it is all sitting on something solid. The first step in laying a foundation was digging, and lots of it. Medieval builders would dig until they hit solid bedrock, which sometimes meant going down 40 feet or more, deeper than a 3-story house is tall. The foundation trenches were then filled not with regular stone, but with a medieval version of concrete called mortar, a mix of lime, sand, and water. However, builders often got creative with the recipe, sometimes adding animal blood, egg whites, hair, and even beer, believing these additives made the mixture stronger. You could say medieval castles were held together by history's weirdest smoothie. Here is where medieval engineering gets truly clever. Builders created what are now called stepped foundations, which resemble giant underground pyramids turned upside down. These structures grew wider as they went deeper, effectively spreading the castle's immense weight and making it more stable. Petit Meat, one particularly impressive example in Scotland, had 7 distinct, perfectly level steps, all accomplished without modern surveying equipment. Speaking of unusual techniques, archaeologists have found strange objects deliberately placed in castle foundations, such as chicken bones in one English castle and coins, religious artifacts, and even shoes in others, likely as good luck charms or ritual offerings. The actual process of laying the foundation was incredibly precise. Workers used wooden frames and plumb lines to ensure everything was perfectly straight, as a misaligned foundation would result in a castle that looked like a failed game of Jenga. The size of these foundations was mind-boggling, with some being up to 30 feet thick. They were not solid blocks, however. Builders created a rubble core by filling the middle with smaller stones and debris, and surrounding it with carefully cut stones. This technique saved on materials and actually made the foundation stronger and more resilient, even helping some castles survive earthquakes. Temperature was a huge factor. If it was too hot, the mortar would dry too quickly and crack. Too cold, and it would not set properly. To combat this, builders would work at night during summer heat waves and cover fresh mortar with straw in winter to protect it from frost. Some even employed the continuous pour method, working around the clock in shifts to lay the foundation in one solid piece. This required hundreds of workers in rotating teams, passing stones hand to hand in human chains and coordinating their efforts with whistles and drums. Many of these foundations are still doing their job today, a testament to the skill of their creators. Medieval castle walls were engineering marvels. Built on those massive foundations, they had to withstand everything from battering rams to trebuchet attacks. The walls of major castles typically stood between 30 to 45 feet high and were often 20 feet thick at the base. The construction was like a medieval layer cake. The outer faces used precisely cut stones that fit together like puzzle pieces, making the walls stronger and harder to climb. Behind these came a layer of rougher rocks, and in the middle, a core filled with a mixture called rubble fill. Smaller stones and leftover chips mixed with mortar. Archaeologists love finding these cores, as they are like time capsules of the construction site. To get the massive stones up high, workers used wooden cranes called windlasses, which were essentially giant elevators powered by people walking inside huge wheels like hamsters in a cage. These machines could lift stones weighing up to 2 tons. The walls were not built straight up and down, but with a slight slope, wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. This design made the walls stronger and helped deflect missiles. Builders would also sometimes construct secret passages inside the walls, used not just for dramatic escapes, but also for moving supplies, sending messages, and even spying on guests. The stones themselves tell interesting stories. Many castle walls still show masons' marks, personal signatures carved by the workers to prove which stones they had laid so they could get paid. Temperature changes were a constant headache, so builders worked in the early morning and late evening during summer to prevent the mortar from cracking. The corners were a point of particular pride, with cornerstones cut with incredible precision, sometimes from special stone quarried hundreds of miles away. As they built, they left holes in the walls called putt-log holes to support wooden scaffolding, intentionally leaving them for future repairs, complete with written instructions on how to use them. The real stars of medieval castle defense, however, were the towers and the gatehouse. Towers were serious business, with round towers becoming the most popular design because they were more resistant to bombardment and had no corners for attackers to hide in. Their walls were often thicker than the main castle walls, and they housed the iconic spiral staircases. These staircases almost always turned clockwise going up, a clever defensive feature that gave right-handed defenders coming down a free swinging arm while restricting the sword arm of right-handed attackers coming up. Some stairs were even deliberately built at different heights to serve as medieval trip hazards. The castle's front door was the gatehouse, the most heavily defended part of the entire structure. A typical gatehouse was a fortress in itself, featuring a drawbridge, one or two heavy metal grates called portcullises, and a deadly space between them known as the killing ground. From murder holes in the ceiling above, defenders could drop rocks, hot sand, boiling water, and even beehives on any attackers trapped below. Lookouts stationed high in the towers served as an early warning system, using a complex system of horns and bells to signal different types of threats, providing enough time to raise the drawbridge and prepare the defenses. If all else failed and enemies breached the walls, towers, and gatehouse, the keep was the last line of defense. It was a giant medieval panic room, a fortress within a fortress where people could survive for months. The keep's walls were incredibly thick, sometimes up to 40 feet at the base, and could withstand immense punishment. The entrance was usually on the second floor, accessible only by a wooden staircase that could be pulled up or burned. Inside, the keep was a self-sufficient world, dark and cramped, but filled with enough stored food and supplies to endure a long siege, and equipped with its own deep well for water. The keep's plumbing consisted of garderobes, which were essentially toilets that were just holes in the wall, dropping waste straight down the outside. The interior was ingeniously designed for defense, with hidden escape tunnels called sally ports, and the ability to seal off each floor from the others. Some even had internal drawbridges and a complex system of passwords and secret knocks. What turns a giant pile of rocks into a home, however, was a different challenge. Heating a castle was like trying to warm up a cave, so they built massive fireplaces that could hold entire tree trunks. Some even had an early form of central heating, with hollow spaces in the walls to circulate hot air. Getting water to the upper floors was a real workout for servants, though some castles had elaborate systems of gutters to collect rainwater and store it in huge tanks. Without electricity, light came from tiny windows, candles, and oil lamps, with some castles going through thousands of expensive beeswax candles a month. Glass windows were a rare luxury, so valuable that some nobles would pack them up and take them with them when they traveled. Bath time was a major production, requiring servants to haul dozens of buckets of hot water up several flights of stairs. The castle kitchens were usually built as separate structures, designed to be on fire all the time with massive chimneys to handle the heat and smoke. A castle is only as good as the people defending it. A medium-sized castle needed about 100 soldiers for basic defense, a number that could swell to over 500 during wartime, with men packed into cramped quarters. Training was constant. Archers practiced daily with longbows that required up to 150 pounds of force to draw, a discipline that physically altered their skeletons over time. The invention of the crossbow changed everything. It was a powerful, easy-to-use weapon that the church once tried to ban, calling it too deadly for Christian warfare. Defenders used creative weapons like caltrops, nasty little spikes, and survived long sieges on strictly rationed food, sometimes resorting to recipes like leather boot soup. Defenders had specialized jobs, from the hobler who patrolled the walls on horseback to the springled master who maintained giant spear-throwing machines. Guards worked in shifts and had creative ways to stay awake, from drinking spiced wine to carrying heavy rocks. The most impressive part of castle defense was the coordination. Different groups worked together like a medieval special forces team, using detailed defensive manuals and complex systems of trumpet signals, flags, and mirrors to communicate. All of these defenses worked remarkably well, until someone invented gunpowder. Early cannon fire could do more damage in an hour than a trebuchet could in a week, and suddenly those thick stone walls were not so invincible anymore.